years, people have been free, but couldn't do jack. But, so in 1964, we had the Civil Rights Act, and then I have a typo here. It's the 1991 ADA Act that allows all of us to hit the handicap button and have all doors open for us. I really appreciate that. That's very handy. And so in the business, when I was at the county, I was their affirmative action officer, the diversity trainer, their cultural coordinator, if you will. And so one of the things that I focused on was discrimination. And so part of my job, people would have complaints, mostly around the time that reviews were going to be done, but they would have complaints, and so I would look at their complaints in two different ways. One, all of their complaints revolved around discrimination, and then the two aspects of discrimination. One is retaliation, where an employer retaliates against an individual who is like a whistleblower or a person who's causing trouble, blah, 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 blah. So I would investigate that. I would also investigate different forms of harassment, which would range from race or gender or ethnic origin, gender or sexuality or sexual orientation, religious or non-religious bias, age and classism, and disabilities, both short-term and long-term. So like technically, a pregnancy is a short-term disability, right? You have somebody living inside of you, I'm disabled too, you know? All right. So that's all this stuff. So this is all law stuff. This is all regulated, and there are consequences and negative things. There are books and laws and all sorts of stuff written about how we deal with this stuff. So discrimination is covered, right? But I want to ask you a question. You don't have to raise your hand, but I want you to think about this question. People talk about the Constitution all the time. How many of us, don't answer this question, don't raise your hand, don't flinch, just sit still. How many of us have actually read the Constitution? Think about that, all right? Think about that. All right, so, and it's not a hard document. You can find Cliff Notes. For those of us who are older, we can find those yellow and black books with the lines on the side. You guys know what I'm talking? Okay, all right, cool. So I want to talk a little bit about our vocabulary, because one of the things that when I taught high school, my students, I really work with them on understanding vocabulary and the power of words, right? Because words are important. And so I found it very interesting that anytime they had any kind of difficulties with something or someone, it was always racist. Like, that was racist! No, you were an idiot. You know, that wasn't racist. It was, you know, and so we had to break that stuff down. And so I want to get a common language so that we can move forward with some understanding. And so first of all, what is bigotry, or what is a bigot? What is bigotry, or what is a bigot?
Archie Bunker.
Archie Bunker. Not many people are old enough to remember Archie Bunker, right? Most of you guys in here aren't. But can you tell us a little bit about Archie Bunker? What were some features or some characteristics of Archie Bunker?
He was flat out name calling just about everybody. He didn't like anybody.
He didn't like anybody. He would name call everybody. What else? Yes, ma'am.
He wasn't very smart.
He wasn't very smart. Okay. So he was a name caller. He wasn't very smart.
Anybody that was different from him.
Okay, he hated anybody that was different from him. Any other characteristics of Archie Bunker? Well, those things that you just described don't sound very flattering at all. Would you consider those flattering? No. But I find it interesting that Archie Bunker was in Americans' living rooms for over 15 years. The All in the Family show was on for 10 years, and then Archie's Place was on for another 5 years. There were a number of Spur spin-off shows like The Jeffersons, which was the same Archie Bunker character, just in a different skin suit, right? And then all the shows that spun off of that. So why do you think, if that was not very flattering, why would Archie Bunker be in our American living rooms for over 15 years?
All of us like watching My Fair Lady after the women's movement. It was hysterical.
Okay, so part of it was hysterical. So we found Archie to be laughable, right? He was a ludicrous character. What else? Why else might he have been in our living rooms? Yes, ma'am.
I think unfortunately a lot of people can relate.
And some people could relate to him, right? I took a class in comedy. And yes, you can take a class in comedy, right? And one of the things that they taught us in the class is that there's two reasons that we laugh at people. The first reason that we laugh at people is because we think that they're smarter than us, right? So for example, Gilligan's Island. The professor could make solar panels out of coconuts, but he couldn't make a boat to get them off the island, right? So we find that laughable. We also laugh at people who we think we're smarter than, right? And so in the case of Archie Bunker, most people thought that they were more sophisticated or smarter than he was. And I personally, I find the character, the time frame, absolutely amazing because it was such a great satirical way for us to look at ourselves at that point in history, right? So Archie was on television for a long time. And he's been known as America's favorite bigot, right? Now, what would happen when what was his son-in-law's name? Meathead. He would call him Meathead, right? So Archie would say these outlandish things, and Mike, the character, Mike would bring some real information to Archie. And he'd say, Arch, that's not how it is. Here's some statistics. Here's some information. Here's some data. And how would Archie respond to that information? Did he say, oh, thank you, Mike. I'm now enlightened. Right? He's telling him to shut up. He'd call him names. He'd say, oh, meathead. Oh, you dumb Pollock. Or, he'd say all these kinds of things because the information would not get through. So, I don't know if you've known bigots in your own life or just seen them on television, but one of the things that's really interesting about bigotry is that bigotry is not based on logic. It's not based on facts. It's not based on data. Bigots feel the way they do because they do. And they'll tell you flat out, I don't care what the information says, this is how I feel. So it becomes very clear that bigotry is what? It is an emotion. That bigotry is an emotional state. So if I bring facts, data, information, statistics to a bigot, will it change how they feel? No. How do you change emotions? People do it to you all the time, right? You go to a movie, you watch a commercial. Remember Sally Struthers and those, feed the world thing, and they'd have the kids, crawling up out of the trash heaps and ripped clothes and dried snot with flies, right? Why didn't they just clean those kids up? Why show all that in the commercial? Why do you think they did that?
Tap into your emotions.
To tap into your emotions. So how do you change somebody's emotions? Do you change it with data? No. You change it with what? Another emotion. All right? So we'll talk about that. Prejudice. What is prejudice? What is prejudice? What's the most clinical way to even kind of talk about that? The prefix and the suffix to prejudge somebody, right? I want to offer to you that I believe that prejudice is good. Prejudice is good. Racial profiling is a good tool. The problem with racial profiling is not that you do it, it's that becomes your only tool. The problem with, I think prejudice is good, and I think you'll understand where I'm going with this, right? So I'm walking down the street, it's 11:30 at night, I see about 5 guys down the street, they're hustling and bustling with each other, being ruckusy. What decision do I make?
On the other side of the street.
I cross the street. And you would say that is what?
Wise.
Wise. It's a good decision. It's smart. It's safe. Right? Makes sense. In that context. But what happens with prejudiced people is that they have an experience within a context. They take their learning from that experience out of that context and try to apply it to every area of their life. Example. So in the context of the five guys, me, I cross the street, good decision. I take that decision out of context. I'm at the Mall of America. I'm walking down the aisle. I see five guys. Based on my previous experience, what do I decide to do?
Go down another.
I go down another aisle. The problem is, when I get down that aisle, what? There's five other people. Now I go over here, and all of a sudden, that what made sense in that context no longer makes sense in a different context. So prejudice, to prejudge. When we take that prejudgment out of context, then it becomes problematic. So when I say, well, when I ran into this kind of person, this is what happened. So that means all people like that are just like this. Becomes problematic. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. The other thing because we talked about discrimination, we have discrimination covered, right? There are law enforcement agencies, there are rules and regulations that govern this. But what we've done is we've taken discrimination and we've slapped people on the hand. Don't say that. Don't do that. And when we've done that, we haven't changed their emotional state, how they feel about that thing. We also haven't changed how they thought about that thing. And so what do? They act the way we tell them to act until they don't think they're going to get caught. Right? And so what ends up happening is, in place of this discrimination, because they haven't changed their emotional state and they haven't changed their mindset, we get this thing called political correctness. That says, I don't want to offend anybody. I can't do, so I still, hate those people, and I still think that they're dumb, but I'm just not going to say it around those people. But I will say it around these people. Because they're not going to. Right? What we have here is a mathematical problem. That A plus B equals C. If we want to change what C is, what do we have to start dealing with?
A and B.
A and B. And I will tell you, once we cover A and B, we don't have to worry about C. It's done. When I start to see that everybody's kids are my kids, no matter what they look like, C is done. All right? So what I'd like for you to do is, on a piece of paper, I want you to draw 5 circles. 5 circles.
Thank you.
I have markers. I have paper for anyone who needs them. Anybody need paper, markers? Yes, sir. Okay, great. Anybody else need paper? All right, so 5 circles, large enough to put information inside of. I know, he's like, oh, now you tell us. All right, so large enough to put information inside of. What I want you to do is I want you to put one thing that you value in each one of those circles. One thing that you value in each one of those circles. It could be a concept like freedom. It could be a person. It could be a relationship. It could be a thing like a car or a cabin. One thing that you value in each one of those circles.
The same thing in each circle?
Nope, 5 different things. Yep, thank you for the clarification.